A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Cam & Company, brought to you by Bearing Arms. My name is Cam Edwards. It is good to be with you today. Coming up on the program here in just a matter of minutes, Laura Carno is going to join us, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, Coloradan, who knows quite a bit about the gun control efforts in that state. John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, announced that he is ending his presidential run. Did you even know that he was running for president? I guess he did make the debate, so yeah, he was there for a brief moment in time. Now it looks like he is weighing whether or not to jump in to the U.S. Senate race in 2020 in Colorado. Cory Gardner, Republican U.S. Senator, is up for re-election. And if Hickenlooper jumps in, he would join at least a half a dozen other Democrats who have already declared that they are going to try to unseat Cory Gardner. But let's get to some headlines from around the nation as we begin our program. Joe Manchin on CBS Face the Nation over the weekend says that he's having good dialogue with the White House when it comes to background checks. Now, specifically, Senator Manchin talking up Manchin to me, which was first proposed back in 2013. This is an expansion of the current federal background check requirements. It is not quite universal background checks, although it moves towards that direction. Under Manchin to me, any gun sale that took place at a gun show, any gun sale that originated online would be required to go through a background check. This would not apply to you selling a firearm to your neighbor or things of that matter. In fact, back in 2013, Joe Manchin said, listen, if you want to post something on your church bulletin board or post something at work about a gun for sale, that wouldn't trigger a background check under Manchin to me. Which begs the question, are anti-gun Democrats on board with Manchin to me anymore? Because no Democrat running for president, no Democrat in Congress, besides perhaps Joe Manchin, has been out there saying, well, this is enough. And even Joe Manchin himself said this was a building block. This was a first step. That drives me nuts. Don't talk about a first step. Talk about the end result. Talk about where you want to go, not just the first step you want to take. Talk about steps 2, 3, 4, 5. Because Senator Manchin's out there, and I understand what he's trying to do. Senator Manchin is trying to demonstrate that he is full of common sense, right? And listen, I don't want to take your guns. He said, I own guns. Nobody's taking my guns. He should probably talk to Beto O'Rourke about that. We'll get to that momentarily. But if this isn't the end-all, be-all of what Senator Joe Manchin wants, then why the hell is he proposing it? Pardon my language. Why not just propose exactly what you want to see on the books that would allow you, Senator Manchin, or any other gun control advocate out there to say, all right, our job is done. I've passed everything that I could possibly want to pass. It's now the law. I'm walking away. I can't think of any more gun control laws that I would want. Tell me what your end game is, not where you want to start. If you want gun owners to get on board, which, by the way, I don't think that they're going to do. Senator Manchin, though, again, saying that having good discussions with President Trump. Meanwhile, President Trump yesterday says that he wants to focus on mental illness, not gun control, or at least that was the impression that he got or that he gave. He did talk with reporters yesterday as he was leaving the Bedminster Golf Club, heading back to Washington, D.C., said Congress is doing a lot on background checks and red flags, and we'll see what happens. But he said, listen, we got to talk about mental health. And he specifically talked about bringing back institutions, inpatient acute care. And he said, listen, we're not talking about, a prison setting. We're talking about getting people the help that they need, which I happen to agree with the president on that. One of the things, though, that we've talked about at Bearing Arms that I would love to see the president talk about, too, is the sort of everyday, less acute mental health care that I think is also, we've got some big gaps in the country right now. So it's, very few Americans need to be institutionalized, right? In a nation of 330 million, very, very few of us are going to suffer that acute mental crisis that would lead to institutionalization. However, we do know that there are a lot of Americans who are struggling with mental illness and struggling with things like depression. Suicide rates are the highest they've been since World War II. They are going up, unfortunately. That includes gun-related suicides. That also includes non-gun-related suicides, which are actually increasing even faster. So if we're talking about mental health, as a broader issue. We need to not just be talking about reopening shuttered institutions. We need to be talking about things like improving access to mental health and even mental wellness programs in schools, right? And in rural areas as well, because this is one area of the country where suicide rates, again, are skyrocketing. And there can be, you've heard the phrase food desert, right? Where if you live in an urban area, there might not be a grocery store with fresh fruits and vegetables within, walking distance, or it might take, hours to get there on public transportation. I think we've got mental health deserts in this country as well. And I don't believe that we're going to be able to open up institutions for every rural location out there. We can work on things like, attracting mental health professionals to some of these underserved areas, but we can also look at things like telemedicine. In terms of bringing those services to Americans via the internet, as opposed to them having to drive an hour and a half to simply talk to a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. So it is good, I think, from a segment perspective, to see the president talking about mental health. I think it's also good from a common sense perspective to see the president talking about mental health. But make no mistake, gun control is definitely still on the agenda when Congress comes back in early September. As a matter of fact, the House Judiciary Committee announced that it's going to be ending its August recess a little early, few days early. They'll be coming back the week before, first week of September. Senate comes back September the 9th. House Judiciary Committee is going to come back the week before. They're going to pass a number of other gun control bills, including a sweeping magazine ban and semi-auto ban. And they're going to try to put that before the full House, which will rubber stamp it and send it over to the Senate. So as Mitch McConnell's talking about things like, red flag law, probably going to get a vote, something with background checks, probably going to get a vote. Anti-gun politicians in the House want to ensure that it doesn't stop there. They want a magazine ban. They want a gun ban. And they want, maybe we'll even see if a gun licensing bill were to pop up. They're also going to be passing legislation that would amount to a lifetime prohibition on gun ownership for those convicted of a misdemeanor hate crime. And I got to tell you personally, I don't like the idea of lowering the bar to prohibit individuals from owning a firearm. Felony level offenses, that's sort of where the bar has been, right? But then lowering it down to, some misdemeanors can amount to a lifetime prohibition as well. When we're talking about removing people's constitutional rights, I think that's a very serious thing. And it's not that I'm in favor of hate crimes. I'm not. But if it's a serious enough crime that you believe somebody should lose their constitutional rights for the rest of their life, why is that a misdemeanor level offense? Why not prosecute them for a felony level offense and go through the proper procedures? I think gun control advocates, again, they want it to be a low bar to remove constitutional rights from Americans. They want it to be as easy as possible. Beto O'Rourke out with his big gun control plan, and basically took everything that everybody suggested so far. They added in a micro-stamping requirement. So Beto is rebilling himself as the gun control candidate, another campaign reset. And interestingly enough, he went to a gun show in Arkansas over the weekend, where he talked with a number of folks, said it was good to reach out, said, I appreciate people talking to me. I didn't necessarily come to agreement. There was one individual who was widely quoted. I think ABC News quoted him. CNN might have quoted him as well. CBS, I know, quoted him. A guy named Mr. Beaver, and I'm blanking on his first name right now. And Mr. Beaver was talking to Beto about a gun ban. And the media described this as, this guy owns these guns, and he said that he'd be okay with a ban. That's not really what he said. He said he didn't think that it would work. He said, I might be on board with it if I got enough money for my firearms and if the rest of America went along. That's a big if, isn't it? Again, we're talking about on the low end here, 16, 17 million firearms owned by millions of Americans. When you include Beto's magazine ban, you're now talking about probably 80 million, 90 million gun owners in this country who would have a magazine that they would be required by law to turn in or else become a criminal. Are Americans going to go along with that? I really doubt it. We've seen in New Jersey a similar magazine ban resulted in no magazines turned into local law enforcement or state police. California's magazine ban, where you're not allowed to possess the magazines that you currently own, that one's tied up in court. But again, we've not seen any indication that Californians are complying with this in massive numbers, which may be one reason why Beto announced that violations of this ban, semi-auto ban and magazine ban, would result in a fine. It's like I say, listen, there's no gun ban that I'm going to support. There's no magazine ban that I'm going to support. But put yourself in the shoes of a gun control advocate for a second and tell me if this makes sense. Email address, by the way, is cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. You can follow me on Twitter as well at camedwards. So we got to get rid of these battlefield weapons of war, right? We have to ensure that Americans don't have these guns on the streets of this country. So according to Beto, we gotta ban these guns and we gotta buy them back. You can't buy back something they never sold in the first place. This is a compensated confiscation program. But if you don't do that, in order to, or I guess to ensure that these quote-unquote battlefield weapons of war are taken off the streets, if you are found in possession of one, or again, a magazine over 10 rounds, you're going to be fined. You're going to be fined. Doesn't that seem like a really small price to pay, literally, for trying to force compliance to get these quote-unquote battlefield weapons of war off of the streets of America's cities? I mean, Eric Swalwell himself didn't really talk about what type of prison time we'd be looking at, but he did say, if you kept your gun, you'd go to prison. Beto says, nah, you won't. You'll just be fined, which I think would further reduce compliance for any sort of proposed ban that Beto wants to put on the books. Now, it could be that Beto's just doing the math. Again, if you're looking at 100 million or so legal gun owners in this country, right? A compliance rate of 97% for those 100 million American gun owners would still leave 3 million Americans in violation of the law. That's a lot of people to charge with a federal crime. Right now in this country, we have about 170,000 federal inmates. About 30,000 of them are currently in prison on weapons charges. Actually, less than 30,000 because that includes, that 30,000 figure includes weapons, arson, and explosives charges. So any attempt to try to criminalize at the federal level something that is common among American gun owners, be it owning a semi-automatic rifle, be it owning a magazine that can hold 20 rounds, when you attempt to criminalize something that is so common and widespread, I think, A, you're going to be dealing with a lot of noncompliance, but B, you're also going to be dealing with a large pool of people that you've turned into criminals. And so what do you do with them? It could be that Beto understands, we're not going to be able to build enough prison spaces for all these folks, so instead we'll just have to fine them. But that does cut against the seriousness of Beto's proposal. And Beto's proposal, by the way, far more than just a gun ban and a buyback. We've written about this at bearingarms.com. We go into great detail about each and every one of his proposed measures. And all of them, with the exception of maybe a federal gun trafficking law, all of them fall into one of three problems. Either they're unconstitutional, they're unenforceable, or they're ineffective. But they do allow Beto to say he's doing something, right? Well, someone who's doing something different than he was doing last week is former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who's no longer running for president. I know you're probably not disappointed. Maybe like two people out there are disappointed, and their last names are probably Hickenlooper. Instead, he's now thinking about running for Senate in Colorado, challenging Cory Gardner. I spoke with Laura Carno, a visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, about this. She lives in Colorado. She's been very involved in the Second Amendment issues, going back years. In fact, going back to when John Hickenlooper and Democrats in the Colorado legislature rammed through gun control legislation back in 2013. She joined me to talk about Hickenlooper's future plans, as well as the ineffectiveness of those gun control laws that Hickenlooper has been touting on the campaign trail. So John Hickenlooper is out now. His presidential campaign really failed to take flight. He's now, running for U.S. Senate in Colorado?
So he's considering a run. The conventional wisdom is that considering a run is just his first step in actually running, and that's been a plan B for him. But I don't think it's going to go so easy for him. The many candidates who are already in that Democrat primary for the chance to run against U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, they're not interested in stepping aside. It's going to be, there's lots of folks locally here in Colorado who are saying, pop the popcorn, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, obviously the presidential primary, very crowded. You got 24 candidates. The Colorado Democrat Senate primary, not as crowded, but you're still looking at 7 or 8 candidates that have been declared so far?
Yeah, something like that. And there were a number who, in local TV interviews, as soon as they got in, were asked the question, what if John Hickenlooper gets out of the presidential primary and runs for U.S. Senate? Are you going to step aside for him? And everybody's like, no, go run for president. I'm actually in this to win it. So, we've had some primaries over the years in, congressional seats and so forth, where all of the Democrats have cleared the way for somebody who maybe had the best chance of winning. But it just doesn't feel like that this time. So it's going to be fun to watch. And honestly, as a Republican, I like seeing it happen on the other side of the aisle for a change, because usually it's our folks.
Well, it's interesting because at the federal level, we've seen a lot of these candidates who are running for president as Democrats. I mean, they've kind of gone after the Obama record, right? And particularly in an attempt to go after Joe Biden. And I get the sense that John Hickenlooper is kind of damaged goods too. In fact, it was last week, former Colorado State Senate President John Morse blasted Hickenlooper on Twitter over gun control, right? Not that John Morse is an opponent of gun control, but he basically accused John Hickenlooper of taking credit for Colorado's gun control laws when he said that wasn't how it happened.
Right. And that was, it was so fun to wake up to that, especially you and I were very involved in covering the 2013 recall of Senator John Morse and over his gun control votes. And there's a little bit that he's missing. I appreciate his tweet, but there's a little bit that he's missing in that Todd Shepard, who was working for Complete Colorado at the time, got through a federal or a Freedom of Information Act request. The conversations, the phone calls, obviously not the recordings, but the phone calls between then Governor Hickenlooper and Michael Bloomberg during that time that the gun control bills were being drafted. So there was some connection. However, Hickenlooper wasn't the one who was out front of it. He actually said after the Aurora Theater killing that this isn't the time for more gun control proposals. So Morse is right that it was really Morse and other folks like that who were the ones pushing forward that agenda. 2.5 of them lost their seats through a recall, and the half is a recall attempt, where Senator Evie Hudak resigned as opposed to being recalled. But yeah, he was right. And that was one of those things you go, okay, is it going to be an easy path for Hickenlooper? And then that tweet hit from former Senator John Morse, and you go, nope, this is going to be a little more difficult for him. And then the other thing, Cam, the other big bucket of things that nobody has challenged him on is Hickenlooper said during the presidential debates, we passed all these great gun control laws in Colorado and it worked. And guess what? It didn't. Crime has risen and continues to rise since those gun control bills were passed. So we are not safer here in Colorado.
Not at all. I mean, there was a headline just a few months ago about Denver being the biggest large city with the largest crime increase in 2018 anywhere in the country. And you're right. I mean, it's interesting because Hickenlooper has sort of been all over the place. I mean, as you say, during the legislative fight, he was reaching out to Michael Bloomberg, although he denied it at the time and then admitted it later. And then after the laws were passed, he goes and he talks to the county sheriffs, right, months later, and he says, yeah, this probably isn't how I would have done it looking back. said that there were problems with the magazine ban. How do you enforce it? He asked, right? Background checks. He said, I thought it was a good idea, but I should have reached out to you guys. And he kind of, walked back some of his support for these gun control laws, or at least as they were written and as they were passed. And as you note, during the presidential debate, he said that, these laws worked. They have not. There's been no increase in background checks in Colorado, despite the quote-unquote universal background check law in the books. The magazine ban, I don't know if there's been anybody that's been prosecuted, maybe, 5 or 6 people. But all of those individuals, I believe, have underlying violent crimes, right? The magazine ban violation is another charge that they're facing, in addition to, let's say, armed robbery or carjacking. And violent crime has gone up, Laura. And I thought the point of it anyway, was to make us safer, not to just give lawmakers the opportunity to say, look, I did something.
Right, exactly. And to your point on the conversation that Governor Hickenlooper had with the county sheriffs, he said, I should have reached out to you. Those were the county sheriffs who showed up en masse. We have some amazing pictures of all of these sheriffs, the rules that Senator Morse set up for testimony said that only one person could represent the county sheriffs. They all, I think 65 out of the 66 county sheriffs opposed those gun control laws. They were all standing behind the one person selected to speak. It was an amazing show of, even though they're elected, most people look at sheriffs as everybody's sheriff. They're not really politicians. They're here to keep everybody safe. So for him to say, I should have reached out to you. And for those of us who were there in those committee rooms, you're like, they were literally right down the hall from you. And then the other thing he did at that sheriff's meeting was kind of tried to pass blame to a staffer on how the signing happened, and that almost like he wasn't fully aware. So yeah, for him to be taking credit for the gun control bills, plus saying that they worked, is lots of however that Pinocchio scale works. Lots of Pinocchios there.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting if he does jump into the U.S. Senate race there in Colorado to see if that actually comes up as a question, from a reporter or 2 or 5. You say these things work. How's it working since violent crime is on the increase? I again, we're not going to see that question asked at the national level, but it'll be interesting if any state level reporters ask about this. And, I might bring that up, Laura, this weekend, because I'm going to be in Colorado for the Independence Institute's ATF party, which is a fantastic event. I am so looking forward to it. You're going to be there as well, right?
I will be there. Look forward to seeing you. It was that might have been the first time we met in person after having been on Cam and Company many, many times, and then met there in person, I think.
I think the first time we met in person was the night of the recalls. Because I think I went to the ATF party afterwards for the first time. I think it was after the recalls, but I don't know. Cool. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. Anyways, we're excited to have you back in Colorado. I know you've got a lot of fans out here in Colorado who look forward to seeing you again. And you're right. ATF is it's a really fun fundraiser put on by the Independence Institute. And lest somebody thinks we're inviting a federal agency, it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, as in we shoot, we smoke, we drink, in that order. And it's, as John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute, always says, it's a celebration of adulthood.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And again, gun control is still a live issue in Colorado right now. I know that John Caldera is actually challenging the Boulder gun ban. We've still got, I believe, the magazine ban that's tied up in court. So, and there are a few tickets available, by the way, if you would like to go to the Independence Institute's ATF party. Sporting clays in the morning, cigars, drinks in the afternoon. Website is i2i.org. That's where you can find the few tickets that remain. Laura, I am looking forward to seeing you this weekend, and thank you so much for being on the program today.
Absolutely. See you soon.
I do hope I get a chance to see at least a couple of you out at the ATF party, by the way, this weekend. It is going to be fantastic. It's a really, really good time, and for a very good cause as well. All right, let's get to today's Armed Citizen story of the day, our good deed of the day, and, of course, a look at the existing failures in our criminal justice system. We'll start there, as a matter of fact, with a story out of Baltimore, Maryland, where there are a lot of problems in the criminal justice system. Baltimore County Police identified this gentleman, Anthony Lance Coley, as the man involved in a shooting involving a police officer there in Baltimore on Thursday. He's now charged with attempted first and second degree murder, first degree assault, numerous firearms-related charges. According to charging documents, faces life in prison for the charge of attempted first-degree murder, which, sounds great and all, except that, as it turns out, Mr. Coley is no stranger to the law. Baltimore Sun reports that Coley was walking in the middle of the road near the intersection of Springwood and Margolin Roads in Baltimore carrying a handgun. When a patrol officer saw him around 2:30 in the morning, officer got out of the car, ordered Coley to put his hands up. Coley instead took off running. Officer took cover behind a black Jeep. A gunshot was fired a short time later. Another officer responded to the scene, ordered Coley to the ground. Police did not find Coley in possession of a handgun at that time, but they did find 2 loaded handguns nearby, and they also found a shell casing from the bullet that was fired. Police officer went to Coley's listed home address, spoke with a man identified as his dad. Coley, back in 2001, was charged with and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, according to online court records and charging documents. Baltimore Sun says at the time he was sentenced to 20 years with 10 years suspended and 5 years of supervised probation. So a convicted killer got a 20-year sentence on paper, was ordered to serve 10 with 5 years of probation. So he's not even on probation anymore. So when the Baltimore Sun says that Coley is now facing life in prison for the charge of attempted first-degree murder, he did a decade. He was sentenced to a decade for actual murder. So the odds that Mr. Coley, even if he goes to trial and is convicted, is actually going to spend the rest of his life in prison, I got to tell you, those odds don't seem very good to me. All right, our armed citizen story, Houston, Texas. How about this? A man with a gun scaring off a would-be kidnapper near the Galleria Mall in Houston, Texas. Yeah. One witness described it as a cross between Gotham City and the Wild West. I know. I thought that was a pretty good description as well. So it happened Thursday afternoon, just before 1 p.m. in the afternoon, according to witnesses. They say that a woman was walking her dog, and a man approached this young woman from behind. Lily Paxton was watching this all go down. She said at first it seemed like the guy was trying to pet the dog, and then he grabbed the woman. Paxton said her body language seemed that all she wanted to do was get away from him. She was fighting him off of her. Then he started hitting her and kicking the dog, grabbing her and picking her up. She said things got violent and aggressive almost within an instant. She said she's in her car. She rolls down her window, starts screaming and honking her horn. And then she said 2 guys got out of their cars and actually intervened. She said some had guns. And at that point in time, it really became a cross between the Wild West and Gotham City. Paxton called 911 as she drove away. She said one of the good guys separated the girl and the dog, and they seemed like they were okay and safe. Houston police said their officers responded to the area shortly thereafter, but weren't able to speak with anybody involved. ABC 13 says they have not been able to confirm if the woman and the suspect knew each other at all. But again, what we do know is that the presence of at least one armed citizen was enough to stop that crime from continuing there at the moment. Hopefully that woman is okay. Hopefully if she did know this guy, she's taking steps or has taken steps to get away from him. And if she did not know this guy, hopefully she never runs into him again. And meanwhile, in the Houston area, I imagine that we've probably got some women who are thinking about signing up for a concealed carry course of their own. Now, our good deed of the day from Chicago. Very good Samaritan ended up pulling a man out of a burning car early Sunday morning. Chris Cammon was waiting for a bus. It was about 3 o'clock Sunday morning. He's headed to work at Cook County Forest Preserve. And he says he heard the screeching of cars drag racing blocks away. As the cars approached the intersection where Cammon was, he says one clipped another and then crashed into a traffic pole, basically right in front of him. He says he ran across the street to help. He says the car was on fire. So I immediately stopped. I tried to get him out of the car. I was yelling at other people to stop to help me pull him out of the car. Kamen, with assistance from others, was able to pull a 24-year-old man from behind the wheel of the burning vehicle, dragged him to safety across the street. He said it was real gruesome. He said his legs were very tangled up. The fire from the car was getting hotter and hotter, so we just had to drag him over. Authorities say the victim was taken to a local hospital. He did survive, although the last report listed in critical condition. Neighbors calling Kamen's actions heroic. James Cheek said whoever that security guy was, he was there to pull him up out of there, because it was obvious that they couldn't get themselves out. Actually, that was a guy named Sean Harris Jr. James Cheek said, thank God for that guy, actually, because these people could have died or anything. Meanwhile, Mr. Kamen says, I seen somebody in trouble and I wanted to help them. I'd do it for anybody, and I'm hoping that people would do it for me. Chris Kamen, a little late to work Sunday morning, but I think that he hopefully got an excused absence there. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Kamen Company. Thank you again for being a part of the program. Make sure that you are following along at bearingarms.com. We are updating the website on an almost minute-by-minute basis, it seems, these days, covering the latest Second Amendment news and information. If you would like Bearing Arms Kamen Company in a podcast form, you can now find us on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher, the townhall.com podcast page as well. We do appreciate you listening and spreading the word, and we will see you back here tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms Kamen Company.